Hello, it looks like people have been joining. Thank you all so much. Just give it another second or so as people enter the room. Hi, Rashida. Welcome. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We still have folks joining us, so we'll just give it another, half a minute or so. Great. All right. Well, hello and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you all are today. Thank you so much for joining us. We are so excited to welcome you to the opening event of Discover Stern, NYU Stern's Diversity Week. So as you all know all too well, we are living in a moment of twin pandemics with COVID-19 keeping everyone masked and distanced, our economy slowed. We know that this is also disproportionately hitting Black and Brown communities. And we're also in the middle of a national conversation on race with systemic racism in our schools, in our police, in our society, a conversation that was spurred on by the horrific murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and many others. We're all feeling the weight and the fatigue of this moment. Many of us and our friends are living in social isolation. This summer, we saw record numbers of people around the country demanding action to change our policing policies. We know and understand that it's against this reality that Discover Stern, this event, this week is taking place here at Stern. I realize that these realities are ones that many of you don't need me to remind you of. You already know this and are living through it. But for me, for someone who has been at Stern for a really long time, I've been here for 15 years, I've met thousands of prospective students, read thousands and thousands of essays and interviews. And I know that education and graduate education is not just for you. For many of you, it's for your families, for your communities. We know just how transformative this experience can be to change not just your personal lives, but also your professional trajectories. So starting with today's events and continuing this week, we can't wait to talk to you about the Stern MBA experience. We want to introduce you to our students, to our alums, put you in front of our faculty, give you a chance to sit in on our virtual admissions committee and imagine yourself as part of the Stern MBA community. So to introduce myself, I'm Rabia Ahmed. I'm the co-executive director of MBA Admissions here at Stern. As I've mentioned, I've been here for 15 years. And when people ask why I've stayed, the answer for me is so simple. It's the incredible people. It's the desire to never be okay with the status quo, to always understand, embrace, and welcome change. So here at Stern, we've had quite an eventful year. We've had to pivot quickly to meet the demands of our students and the needs of members of our community, from our alums to our faculty, our administrators. We've had to train our teams and our faculty in new and exciting ways to create more opportunities for engagement, all while taking care of one another. And this was really only possible under the incredible leadership of our Dean, Raghu Sundaram. So Raghu is truly the embodiment of one of our core values, which is IQ plus EQ. He's brilliant, and he's also a great people person. He's a member of our faculty, widely published, has written a number of books, and has been published in many different places. But in addition to that, prior to being named Dean, he served as the Vice Dean of MBA Programs and Online Learning. And under his deanship and his leadership, we have launched many different programs, including our focused MBA programs in technology and fashion and luxury, along with the Masters of Quantitative Management, online degree, and many others. So since March, Raghu has been our fearless leader, really captaining us during these times when we've made these pivots very quickly, and helping all the members of our community to be ready to embrace this new change and this new normal. In many ways, there's no one better that could have sort of led us through this time. And since then, we're really proud that we have been able to reopen as an institution for now. Hopefully it'll remain this way through the course of this semester. But we're open in a hybrid fashion with students taking classes online, and as well as for those who are able to come into campus, they're able to take some classes in person as well, while still maintaining strict health standards that are required by NYU and New York State. Raghu has also opened the dialogue and conversation around anti-racism with his team and with the administration of the school. As you can imagine, Raghu wears many, many hats, is responsible for many things and many people, but what we know most is that he loves meeting people, he loves hearing their stories, and more than anything, he really loves the Stern community. So it's my privilege to introduce Dean Raghu Sundaram. Raghu, please join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabia. I don't know whether it's the right thing to actually say this, but one of the great advantages of being dark-skinned is you can't see me blushing right now. I had no idea what you were going to say. But thank you very much, and good day, everyone. Welcome to our Discover Stern event. We have something over 150, and we're expecting around 200 prospective students tuning in from around the world today. And I want to extend a special welcome to every single one of you. It's really wonderful to see all of you today, and thank you for taking the time to discover Stern. Discover Stern, as you probably know, is a partnership between MBA Admissions and AHBBS, our Association of Hispanic and Black Business Students. And it's been an annual tradition at Stern for more than 19 years. As you may also know, Stern has had long-standing partnerships with several key organizations that promote diversity. That includes MLT, the Forte Foundation, and of course, Consortium, the Consortium for Graduate Study in Management. Stern has partnered, I should say, with Consortium for more than 30 years, and I hope many of you will become part of that legacy, a legacy of which we are very, very proud. We are absolutely delighted to invite you into the Stern family for the next few days to experience our community firsthand, our classes, our culture, and most of all, our amazing students. All of you are in the process of exploring business schools to find the best fit for you. And I'm sure all of you are exploring a number of top schools. This is the most essential part of the process, finding a school that fits your needs and your desires. I'm often asked the question, why should I consider Stern? For me, most of all, Stern begins with a statement of our values. Stern is about our values. What are these values? First of all, we believe in excellence, but an excellence unbound by tradition. We are at the very top of business education in most of the traditional fields of business, in finance, in accounting, in management, in marketing. But we are also all the time looking to the future needs of management and looking at what we can do to influence the path management is taking. So many years ago, we started a center on sustainability. We started a center on business and human rights. We incorporate this into our curriculum because these are important issues that the managers of tomorrow are going to be dealing with. Inclusivity, diversity. These are all critical issues, and we are always looking to the issues of tomorrow. Perhaps more than anything else, IQ plus EQ. This really describes our culture. Our culture begins and ends with people. We seek people with outstanding intellect, yes, but also outstanding interpersonal skills. Leaders need intelligence, but they also need empathy. It is only together that we can build and nurture a community founded on the principles of diversity and inclusion. Every year, applicants tell us that once they have connected with our students, they realize this is not just a marketing slogan, it is who we are. Third, what we call radical responsibility. We believe in the power of business to not just impact the bottom line, but to improve the world. We believe that business is a force for good, perhaps the greatest force for good in this world. The values of business very often seep into the community, and it is important that business lead change in this world. Lastly, we are what we describe as uncommonly connected. We happen to be in the heart of one of the world's great business capitals. And that means that our entire approach to business comes with very deep ties to these industries and organizations that are all around us. Unparalleled access to these industries. Stern, Stern, as you will learn when you come here, is an incredibly tightly knit community. The word family is often overused, but if there is an organization to which it applies, I think it is Stern. It is the place where you come to explore, to learn more about yourselves, to experiment, but also one where you can fail without fear and cultivate resilience. I look forward to the opportunity to welcoming many of you to Stern in the near future. Stern is the place where we often say you can learn to make change your ally. We issued that as our call to action last year, but we had no idea at the time how prescient our call would be when the world literally changed overnight this year in March, when we suddenly went into a shutdown in the face of the global pandemic. Here's a simple example of how we embrace change. When the pandemic hit in mid-March, our first-year MBA students were in the middle of their internship search. Overnight, those internship search ended, but parallelly also we noticed that businesses, small businesses in New York, were struggling with the need to find direction. Now, we had these amazing MBA students looking for meaningful opportunities to build on their own skill sets, but also willing to help the world. We had this community of small businesses, of nonprofits, of startups that were looking for strategic support but could not afford that support. So what did we do? We swung into action overnight. We launched a program called Stern Works and raised support from our alumni, from our board. In the end, 64 Stern students received Sternworks summer internship grant funding. More than 50 partner companies hosted interns. Doing well, but doing good. This is the essence of what it means to be at Stern. Sternworks was not the only example, of course, of what we did. We also created a new virtual lecture series featuring our most outstanding faculty. It was meant for students and alums to gain insights on what is happening from the pandemic, the impact on business, on markets, on financial systems, as it was unfolding in real time. We hosted 19 events in 5 months and also hosted many other events to engage with the community. But even as we were battling the pandemic, as all of you know, the devastating pattern of acts of inhumanity in a very long history of dehumanizing Black lives that stretches back decades and centuries, came into very sharp relief. My leadership team and I, we communicated to the members of the Black community at Stern in early June our steadfast support. Now, the truth is, most of us who do not happen to be Black cannot in any way fully comprehend the pain, the suffering, the anxiety, the concerns for safety that they experience. But what we can do, what we continue to do, and what we must do is stand in solidarity with all members of our community at all times to dialogue, to offer support, and most of all, to serve as allies. You will hear more details on this from my colleague, Gary Fraser. Gary happens to be a Stern alum, and he's our Associate Dean of Diversity and Inclusion. It's a newly created post, and he joined as our first Associate Dean of Diversity and Inclusion just a short while ago. But Gary is an old Stern hand. He's not only a Stern alum, he was also for a long time Stern administrator and a remarkable administrator. You will find what an incredible person he is over the next half hour. Gary, like Rabia, embodies what it means to be at Stern, that this place seeps into the fiber of your being in a way that you never feel like leaving. Gary had actually moved to Los Angeles, and in January, at the height of winter, we managed to persuade him to come back to take on this role. And I think there can be no greater expression of the love for Stern than that. I hope I get the opportunity to call many of you Stern students, members of the class of 2023. At the very least, I hope you will be interested enough to apply to us and to consider us in your plans. Don't hesitate to be curious, to ask questions, to be engaged, and try and sample the Stern experience over the next few days as much as you can. Most of all, thank you for bringing your energy and enthusiasm to Discover Stern Week. Please write to me anytime if you have any questions. Write to any of the members of our admissions team. Write to any of us if you should have any questions, would like to have any doubts answered, or you would like to engage further with our community. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you all.
Thank you, Raghu. Thank you for joining us today. I know you're busy all week, and so we really appreciate your time on Sunday as well. Thank you. So as Raghu mentioned, there's so much that you have to learn that we wanted to share with you and introduce you to this week. But at this time, I have the privilege of introducing Gary Fraser. Gary, are you there? Can you join us? Hi, Gary.
Hi, I am here.
It's nice to see you. So, so I have the privilege and honor, really, of introducing Gary Fraser. Gary, I've learned so much from Gary over the time that I've known him. So I want to give just a few quick stories of things that I've learned from Gary. So early on in my career at Stern, when I was working in admissions, I worked with a lot of the student clubs directly, and Gary at the time was our dean of students, and he oversaw student activities. And I remember this one particular moment. Gary probably remembers this because we've spoken about it a few times since then, where I had to manage a relationship with one of our student clubs, and there was an issue that happened with something that they were supposed to be helping us with and they were doing, and there was a misunderstanding, and they told me, you need to go and talk to Gary. Now, I was very junior in my time at Stern. I was very nervous about going to speak with a dean, but I set up some time and I went to his office, and he opened his door and he said, how are you doing? Come have a seat. And he sat me down and he just started asking me about myself. Really just, I was completely caught off guard because I thought, here I was talking about this like student situation that was happening, and what he wanted to do was just see how I was doing, knowing that like the power dynamic was probably one that was making me very nervous, which it was. And it was at that time, and something that I think about often, where I really was taught about leadership, what it means to be a leader, someone that has a position of power, and how you treat people that are at all levels in your orbit. And Gary did that for me. Since that time, as Raghu mentioned, Gary decided to try out another coast. We'll forgive him for that. I mean, California. So he went out there, he moved out west, worked at a few schools that we don't really need to name right now. And although we were really sad to see Gary leave Stern, we'd meet him every summer at the Consortium Orientation Program event. And he would come to Consortium OP, and he would always reach out to us in advance and be like, let's get dinner one night so we can all catch up. And every single year we'd catch up with Gary. He would always suggest it. He would always come as a Stern alum, as an administrator, maybe from another institution, but he knew the value of community. He knew how much it meant to just stay in touch with people and get to know them, and constantly ask them how they're doing. And to this day, he really defines community wherever he goes. Our alums talk about it all the time. Our students talk about how important it is. And so he taught me about community, and being here as long as I have, it's something that I cherish. And as I mentioned earlier, it's one of the reasons why I love being at Stern. The last thing well, I've learned many things from Gary, but one of the last things I want to mention today that I learned about Gary was, so 2 years ago when I was presenting in Los Angeles, I was there for a presentation. This is back in the day when you used to like get on planes and go places and like have seats next to each other and people would sit. Anyway, we were having a presentation. Gary was joining our session, and he was there to speak with the alums and to answer any questions. And after the session, I saw him huddled in a corner with another administrator that had come with me, and they were having a conversation. And I was like, oh my goodness, I said something wrong. I don't know what I did. I was really, I got so nervous. And a few weeks later, we got a note that Gary was joining us, coming back to Stern and joining us in this newly created role as the Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion. And that's when Gary taught me about family. Like, you keep in touch, you stay a part of it, and you come back. And Gary came back. And as Raghu said, it was, I think, something that Raghu was very, very proud of, which is getting getting Gary back to Stern in January from California. But more than that, just having Gary be the person we wanted to lead our diversity and inclusion team here at Stern. And this year, Gary has taken the charge to lead Stern when it comes to IDBE, inclusion, diversity, belonging, and equity. And what a year to do that. He has shown us, he has taught us, he is helping us all grow as a school, as people, not just to understand, but also to practice anti-racism. So I'm so pleased and excited to introduce you all today to our Associate Dean of Diversity and Inclusion, and my friend, Gary Fraser. So thank you for joining us for this conversation, Gary.
Thank you, Rabia, and thank you for that beautiful introduction. It's so funny when you tell that story about being, I love it because, I actually, don't remember those days when you were so junior. You moved up appropriately so because you've been so impactful and effective in your role. And the funny thing about that story about when you were in LA a couple of years ago, it was, and I think you may remember I sent you this email and I wrote in caps because I just wanted to stress that I felt so bad about not being able to talk to you as well as I know you, that I was possibly coming back because it was before all the details were kind of hammered out. So I didn't want to share it then. But it's nice to go down this memory lane of all the interactions we've had. And it's just a great example of all the interactions I think that we have in this Stern community, which includes students, alumni, administrators, and faculty.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I remember a lot of those. Those were a really formative experience in my career at Stern. So Gary, we wanted to have a conversation with you today to talk about all the things you're doing in your sort of your role, your own trajectory, sort of your experience. But Raghu and I have mentioned it a little bit, but a lot of the audience may not be familiar with your long history with Stern. Can you just share a little bit about your Stern journey?
I will. I'll just do a little because, it's a 30-year history and so it could take up the whole hour. I do want to quickly welcome everyone as well. And it's great to see such a large number of folks that are interested in NYU Stern. I did a little perusal of the attendee list and I saw some folks that I've been able to meet with before, either in person or through Zoom. There's someone I used to have the pleasure of working with that's also on the call. So hi Betsy. And it's just great to see this energy, even though we're all virtual. I can tell you, I've learned that some of these sessions have energy and some don't. And this one definitely has a lot of good energy. So, but yeah, my background is long and it's amazing because I started as a full-time MBA in the fall of 1990, so 30 years ago. And, NYU was always one of those schools as a native New Yorker that I thought about going to growing up. At the time, it was a very good regional school, and it's become such an amazing global institution now. And I went to Syracuse undergrad, but always had in my mind, NYU is a place for me. And so I ended up, applying for my MBA and I didn't follow advice that I give to anyone today. I kind of say you should consider a few schools, apply the ones you really feel resonate with you. And I just felt like I had one good business school application in me. So I was thinking about Columbia, I was thinking about Stern, and, I kind of said, you probably have one good application, so go for the one that really matters to you. And so I ended up applying to Stern, and I was fortunate to be selected as a consortium fellow and haven't looked back. So I did 2 years in the full-time program, worked for about 8 years in corporate America, and then had an interesting conversation with someone who reported to me in marketing the career path I chose, who was also Stern alum, and we were just talking about what happens next in our lives. And she said, you should talk to the dean, you should work at NYU. And I didn't know doing what. And I did have this conversation with the dean, and he wanted me to consider coming in to run the Office of Career Development. So I interviewed for that role, and again, it just seemed like this role I'd never thought about before, but it was just a great fit for me. And then through that, I was able to move into Dean of Students, and I had a wonderful 12 years from 2000 to 2012 at Stern. And yes, the warm weather and the lifestyle of LA did draw me to Los Angeles. And I worked there for 8 years. And as exactly as Raghu shared, we had this wonderful conversation in, I want to say it was September of 2018, right before you came out to visit Rabia. And, you know, it just inspired me to have a continued conversation. So I ended up going to New York on a visit and having more conversations in October, and started in January 2019. And, you know, it's been great. It's been a great role that I've had, and it's about relationships. I think I've been fortunate to build great relationships with faculty, with administrators, and, you know, this concept of inclusion, diversity, belonging, equity, they're sensitive in some cases. And I think it requires the right relationship to have some of these difficult conversations. And so I've been fortunate to be able to use the relationships I've built over years to have these conversations and inspire, you know, more people to have them, and inspire students to have them. And I think we have a kind of community that embraces that, where there's some communities where, you know, the typical, they maybe want to avoid it. But it's been great to see how people embrace these conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're Stern's first associate dean for diversity and inclusion. What has this role meant to you? What are your responsibilities? What are some of the things that you're most excited about?
You know, one of the reasons I decided to go down this route, because I always had delved into things around diversity and inclusion, but always had roles focused on student affairs, leadership development, career services. And for me, it was important that this role really was able to impact the institution. So I have peers at other schools that have a role that's similar to mine, but different, where it may be just student focused. Some may be focused on administrators or faculty. Mine is focused on the whole NYU Stern community, which includes over 5,000 students, and certainly, you know, our full faculty for all the programs, as well as, you know, all staff and administrators. And I felt that if the school was serious about making a really big commitment and growth in this area, that they needed to bring in a perspective of everyone being involved in this process. And so my role involves partnering. I always make the slight distinction in my title as Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion, as opposed to of, because when you say of, like I was Dean of Students, and when there's a student problem, guess what? I got it, you know? I mean, that story you told, there's a problem, you know, I got involved, right? And so with diversity and inclusion, everyone needs to be involved. And my role is sometimes as a consultant, sometimes as a partner, sometimes as a teammate. But the goal is that every, you know, whether it's administrative unit, department, faculty department, student club, or even program, has to have some thoughts, ideas, plans around inclusion, diversity, belonging, and equity. And so for me, I focus on belonging, because I believe that if you have a sense of belonging, then all those other things will take care of itself. If you have a sense of belonging, that means that who you are, how you identify, is being recognized and included, and that the environment is diverse enough to have all those representations of social identity. Mm-hmm. And because you do feel included and you have the sense of belonging, it's equitable. So it really comes down to, do we all have the sense of belonging? And do we all have a responsibility to make sure that we all have the sense of belonging? So we talk a lot about the concept of being an ally for all. And so my work involves partnering with faculty, partnering with administrators and departments, partnering with program heads, the other vice deans, certainly Dean Sundaram, and students, in terms of everyone having an approach, a plan, an organized way to lead, not just participate in terms of inclusivity.
Mm-hmm. What are some actionable steps that you've helped sort of occur at Stern or happen at Stern to ensure inclusion, diversity, belonging, and equity exists within our community?
Well, I think the first thing is that we have to be able to talk about it. And I mentioned I have peers at other schools that work in the space, and typically the effort is on whatever underrepresented population there is. If it's by gender identity, if it's by race, it's those folks in those roles focus on providing support. And that's certainly a part of my job, but my main job is to make sure that everyone has understanding that they have a responsibility to be able to relate to everyone else. So it's not just a responsibility for an underrepresented population to adapt to whatever a majority population is. It's the responsibility of everyone to be able to adapt to everyone, whether you're an American citizen or you're a global citizen. Everyone has to figure out, how do I grow in this space? And it's an amazing opportunity because we have such a diverse population. So one of the things I'm really proud of is that this year we tested it with our full-time MBAs and our incoming freshmen, and then also some of our executive MBA classes. But this year, all of our major programs, undergraduate, full-time MBA, part-time MBA, as well as executive MBA, will be taking an assessment, the Intercultural Development Inventory. You know about it because you're one of our certified qualified administrators to deliver the results. The thing that's neat about this assessment is if you have enough folks that are qualified to deliver the results, not only do you take this assessment, which is a measure of what your intercultural competence is, you have the opportunity to meet with a qualified administrator to review your results and figure out how you can grow, figure out your own individual plan. And this is something that no other business school is doing. I know some that have tried it with certain programs, and the key with it is having dialogue about what it means, because it'll reveal that some people may be not that great at intercultural competence, maybe because they haven't had the opportunity to try it out and to grow. And so sometimes people will react negatively to it. And so I think how you have the dialogue is important, which is why you need to have a team of qualified administrators to deliver the results. But the goal is that every student not only maybe takes the assessment, but they also work on a plan while they're at Stern to grow. And because it's something that's measurable, you can take it again to see if you did grow. So that's something we're really proud of. And it opens the door for everyone saying, I have a role to play in this. And to what Dean Sundaram was speaking to earlier, we had some really difficult conversations in June. And one of the things we talked about is, we can't solve the problems that's happening across the country or across the world with regard to racial injustice. But we can look at what we're doing in our own bubble, in our own NYU Stern bubble, and what role can we all play. And so every one of the vice deans, including Dean Sundaram, agreed to take this assessment as well too. And so that's a perfect example of leading by example and saying, okay, what role can I play in terms of making sure this environment is the best it can be?
Yeah. I know you know this because we've had conversations after I took the assessment, how sort of eye-opening and transformative that's been for me this year, just in thinking about how I react and my sort of like action orientation when it comes to some of these things. For business school students, especially, what do you think one or two of the most important things they can take away from their experience as it relates to IDBE might be, and what are you hoping that they gain from all of the work that you and your team are doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, there's a professional business side to this, and then there's also a personal, individual side to it. So in terms of developing the skill of intercultural competence, one of the things we talk about, even as early as orientation, is we talk about some research that organizations like McKinsey's done, which showed that companies that are gender balanced and has the diversity in terms of gender tend to financially outperform companies that don't. Companies that are ethnically diverse, 35% outperform financially than ones that are not. And so there's a business reason for being able to understand your own intercultural competence and working with people that are different than you. There's so much research that shows diverse teams bring about better results versus homogenous ones. So from an individual performance and from a company performance, but because of that, the trend over the last 5 years is companies realize that it's not just nice to have diversity and inclusion. It's needed if you want to be a best-in-class organization. So they are recruiting, all types of diversity because they know that they can't just have homogenous teams, which was, pretty much the history for business school. When you think about that, it's been around for over 100 years, and you think about the first 70, 80 years of it, it was fairly homogenous. And so companies know that they need this diversity, but they also know that they need people that can work with people that are very different than themselves. So from a professional standpoint, we know it's something employers are looking for. From a personal standpoint, it's about enhancing who you are as an individual and having the ability to understand more, learn more, and be able to adapt better to people that are different. And it allows you to be more knowledgeable, allows you to impact people in different ways. I teach a class called Leading Inclusive Teams with our executive MBAs, and it's based on the principles of a few leadership competencies that tie completely to inclusion, diversity, belonging, and equity. Things like managing ambiguity and ensuring accountability, and also interpersonal savvy. Those are skills that you need as a leader, but you also need if you're leading a diverse team. And we know that pretty much every team in the future is going to have some measure of diversity. So there's a lot of personal development in this, but there's also this professional side that's going to benefit MBAs in the future as well too.
Yeah. So for the prospective students that are here on for Diversity's Turn, many of them may be entering spaces where there aren't people that look like them or have shared experiences to them. Based on having worked in business schools for so many years, what advice do you have for them?
Well, I think the advice is to not just to talk to people that you might automatically feel comfortable with. I think that typically when we're looking at all these different options in terms of, there's a lot of great business schools out there, you might connect with the BBSA, at Stern is called AHBBS, Association of Hispanic and Black Business Students, and you might meet some students there. But I always think it'd be interesting to talk to people that don't identify the way you do by either race or gender identity or some major social identity, and see how you interact with them. Because that's going to be the population that you're going to have to work well with. And that population is going to have to work well with you as well too. So I think having conversations with people that may have totally different backgrounds, if someone hasn't traveled much, someone that maybe lives in a different part of the world, because that's when you get a true sense of that culture, not just the subculture of social identities you connect with, but the whole culture of that school. And you can do that by, industry, focused on industry or functional areas. But I think that that'll give you a sense of whether you would have a sense of belonging. And the reason I feel good about it at Stern, one of the things I did when I came back is participate in this podcast that we have at NYU Stern. And one of the students was a member of AHBBS, and they didn't identify as Black or Hispanic, but they said, yeah, I'm a member of AHBBS, and AHBBS is such an important organization. It's a community organization. It's not just for the members. And truth be told, in 1990 and 91, I was president of AHBBS when I was at Stern, but it was a support club. It's funny because last night I had a Zoom call with some classmates that people I hadn't seen in years, maybe 10 years or so. And we just randomly had this Zoom call last night. It was so good to see everyone. But it was funny because there were some folks from the class behind me that were on the call. And they said, yeah, we just stuck with our own crew in AHBBS. We didn't really interact with anyone else. And at the time, AHBBS was kind of like a support group for those members. There's so few of us. But it's nice to see how it's grown. And it's become a community where people join as allies, people go to their events as well. And those are the kind of things you want to see if you're thinking about any school is, how do those people that you identify with interact with people outside of that group, and how do people that are different than you interact with you?
Mm-hmm. So we're getting, well, I think one thing I just want to comment on, I think what's interesting now for our, the student clubs is so many of the clubs are led by members of AHBBS, like our Stern Women in Business Club, I think Graduate Finance Association. There's just such good, like the community and the professional, there's this desire and hopefully this like continued push for on both ends to like see more members of AHBBS be in a lot more sort of like leadership roles. They historically always have been. I know that's your puppy.
Yeah, I was apologizing. I have a puppy in the background. The door's closed too. That's how loud he is.
We haven't seen him yet. He might make an entrance sometime.
He might.
But it's nice to see sort of like how things are hopefully going to continue to move in this realm. So it's not just like a one-off sort of thing, but you just see them very much in and around, you know, a lot of the stuff that we do at Stern.
Yeah, that's a great point to bring up, Rabia, because it shows that that those students and student leaders have a sense of belonging. And because they have a sense of belonging, they feel comfortable to lead. And I would say that's something you also want to look at. Look at the leadership of some of these clubs and student organizations. You know, how diverse are the leaders, you know? That's a sign that those members, regardless of what percentage they are of the total class, feel a sense of belonging, not just in, you know, their maybe core club, but also in the Stern society at large. You know, I know our one of our student government presidents is a consortium student as well. And yeah, when you look at the major leadership roles, you just see an amazing diversity when you think about race, when you think about gender identity, and some other identities as well too.
So we're getting a lot of really great questions from folks on today's webinar here today. So I'm just going to serve some up to you. So Claire is asking, having worked at other business schools, what do you think differentiates Stern?
That's a great question, Claire. Thanks for asking. You know, it's a different answer for every school. You know, I would say there's some schools that are larger than Stern that you know, have a great professional network that you'll have for the rest of your life. And I think that at Stern, the size of around 350 students is ideal because you are building this amazing social human capital network. And part of that umbrella is this professional network. So when you reach out to somebody who's a Stern alum, because they had an amazing 2 years here, they're probably going to respond, you know. So I have, I think over 6,000 people in my LinkedIn profile, and
that's it, Gary, 6,000.
Yeah, I know. I got to work on that, and probably at least 2/3 are Stern alums. You know, some are alums from some of the other schools I worked at as well too. And the other thing I'll say is that you get this unique combination of this urban environment, and even though we're somewhat virtual now, you still get the feeling of it being in a center of commerce, a center of business. It's so easy to tap into whatever industry people are interested in. But because of the size of the program, you have this community feel. So you have this combination of a huge business kind of epicenter, but you also have these community building activities, events. Alums are still engaged. So you get the benefits of this kind of small remote part of the country, but also the benefits of it being a big city. And Greenwich Village, as you know, it's a neighborhood. It's not, it's not that it's just NYU. NYU is a part of this neighborhood. We like to think of ourselves as good neighbors, but it's unique in terms of that combination as well too. There's really no other school that provides that combination in terms of size and community and business professionalism.
So thank you for that. So a couple of questions are on the same topic. Ellis, Juan, and Jonathan Davis are asking, can you point us to some more recent changes you've seen in diversity and inclusion programming at Stern? And from when you first started working at Stern almost 20 years ago, what aspect of Stern has experienced the greatest transformation?
The greatest, I'm sorry, the last part?
Transformation.
Yeah. I would say one thing that we, in addition to this intercultural development inventory, one thing that we started last year was we had all of our incoming MBA students in the full-time program and freshmen have intergroup dialogue. And it's when you break students up into small groups, ideally 12, and you just talk about how you identify, which social identities you think about often, which ones you don't think about often, which ones maybe have the greatest impact on your life, and which ones maybe are difficult to talk about. And the reason why it's important to do this is there's also a lot of research that shows the standard diversity workshop doesn't work. It sometimes puts people in a place where maybe they feel uncomfortable, but they're in this large session and they feel like, okay, I checked the box, I went to this thing. And when you have smaller intergroup dialogue. It goes from someone teaching concepts about inclusion, diversity, and belonging, equity, to this group educating each other. Because you can imagine not everyone's going to say, I think about the same social identities often, or the ones I don't think about often. And it includes ones that you might not always think about. And it does give people a sense for, well, the ones I don't think about, I'm probably privileged to have those. You know, even myself personally going through that, I realized I would always say, well, maybe there's a disadvantage. There is a disadvantage being a Black male in America. But I also, going through this, realized that I don't think about being male often. And there's a lot of people that identify as women that do. So there is privilege in being male. And so I was able to separate those things. And I think that discovery happens in these small group conversations. I know people are probably wondering, you know, what do we do about difficult conversations? Well, this creates a platform for having difficult conversations. And we start with this in orientation. So that's something I think that's also unique. I think a few other schools might be doing that, but I think because we're the right size, we can break it down to small enough groups where it becomes really impactful. You know, our biggest challenge, I will tell you, is our undergraduate college. We have almost 3,000 of them when you think about the 4-year program. And, you know, if everyone thinks back to their high school years, you probably had lunch with people that looked just like you or were similar to you. And so we're getting all those folks, and we're getting a very diverse community, but people stay in their micro communities. And so one of the things why I love being responsible for the whole school is I'm starting to have more dialogue between the graduate program and the undergraduate program, because we want, you know, more seasoned individuals who are MBAs to maybe mentor, lead by example, to show, you know what, it's important for you to interact with people that are different than you. And here's how you can do it. So I think that it's a great opportunity for our MBAs to take on leadership roles with this younger population and help them grow. Because for them, they're used to, especially when you're in a new business, new environment, new school, you're going to find what's common, what's similar to you, and what you have in common. And so we're trying to break that trend, and we're starting to get the MBAs involved in helping to educate undergrads on that side.
Yeah, and with the undergrads today, it feels like they're, with the generational shifts that are happening, their challenges are even different than those that are like 5-6 years older than them. So
exactly,
it's an interesting conversation. And as Gary mentioned, as an IDI qualified administrators, we'll be having these conversations with undergrads. And what better to start than when you're someone who's new to college, you know, going to school in seemingly one of the most diverse cities in the world, like coming to terms with where you are in terms of your own personal experience with it. So it's incredible work that you and Nico and Dory are doing on this. So thank you. Tons of really, really great questions. I want to try to get to as many of them as we can. So here's one from Rashida. So, hi, Dean Fraser. Throughout your career, I am interested to know how you have operated from a place of integrity in the DEI space when you anticipate pushback or lack of intercultural competence. What are the conversations that you have with yourself and your personal, quote, board of directors?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I sometimes when I have difficult conversations, and I've had to have some with either a vice dean or a faculty member, sometimes I will start with saying just a simple statement. Look, we all have bias, and I want you to know I'm probably bringing some bias to this conversation. You know, and that helps because it lowers the sensitivity. You know, because I want people to know we're going to have a conversation to figure this out together. You know, because it's no clear answer to any of this, you know, so, but I do use kind of my board of directors to, you know, speak to maybe some frustrations that, you know, happen sometimes, because really when you talk about intercultural competence, you can't assume that everyone, you know, has this great level. And so the ability to kind of have people understand the impact, you know, I was having a conversation with the department just a few weeks ago, and I was sharing to them the impact of not having, you know, more diversity in that group, in that immediate group. And the impact really is, if you have a homogenous group, they're going to make decisions in a vacuum, really, and it may not really be representative of that whole student population. If you have a homogenous group, they may not be able to connect with everybody in that student population. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier. The new research is showing that the benefits of diverse teams And if there's a deficit in terms of diversity in some small work team, how do they make up for that? Do they do some self-education? Do they do coaching? You know, and it's going to be customized. So I think it's just when you really drill it down, if you really believe that everyone should take ownership of this, you really do have to drill down and have a lot of one-on-one conversations with people and with work teams and groups. You know, one of the things that we did at our deans and directors meeting, you may remember, Rabia, is we talked about pledges. And we said, you know, with all the conversation about racial injustice, and certainly organizations look to the leaders and say, how do we fix this? But the reality of it is everyone has to play a role in fixing it. So one of the things I recommended to departments, work teams, create your own pledge, you know, and you can include whatever you want into it, but create something that allows you to say, our environment is going to be much more inviting, safe, secure, and a sense of belonging for everyone based on what we decide we want to represent in that pledge. And I've heard some amazing pledges that some departments have come up with. And so it's about getting, again, drilling down so everyone's owning part of this process.
Thank you. Eduardo is asking, underrepresented minorities have a networking gap that can hinder professional growth. Can you talk about how Stern's diversity team has worked to close this gap? I'm in particularly interested in how alumni from Stern and AHBBS have been involved with closing the networking gap.
Yeah, that's a great question. The one thing we actually have done is it was actually not something that I did at all. It was actually our development and alumni relations team created a database of, I think it's maybe 500 alums of color that across programs, executive MBA, undergrad, full-time MBA, part-time MBA, that could be a resource for faculty. One of the things that I've talked to faculty about is looking at the content in their classroom in terms of their class content. So not just the students in the classroom, but the material. So guest speakers, cases, articles, anything that you're using to educate your students, what is the diversity of that course content? And typically, you know, people's network is homogenous. And so that's why, you know, it's tougher for maybe people of color because, you know, if there's fewer of them, particularly in the career paths they want to go into, the network's going to be limited. And so what we're trying to do is have faculty bring back some of those alums as guest speakers, because there's definitely representation across all these industries. And we're also trying to re-engage those alums as well too. And so I think some of it starts with outreach to our alums. And I think me coming back has been great because I've been able to reconnect with so many, you know, terrific alums. Some found me and saw the announcement either through, you know, channels through Stern or just through LinkedIn. And so I've been pleased at the amount of engagement that they want to play, whether it's undergrads, whether it's MBAs, but I've already had dinners with, you know, a group of alums that want to talk about what they can do and what's happening with the school with regard to that. I had an inclusion, diversity, belonging, equity committee this past school year, and we had 4 alums on it. So it was to take a perspective of things and recommendations we should be doing as a school, not just from a current student, but also from alumni. We had faculty on the committee as well too, as well as administrators. And so the goal is, how do we keep having conversations about how we can get better? But certainly we do feel a sense of an engaged and renewed interest from, you know, some of our alums that identify as either Black or Hispanic or Indigenous that want to be re-engaged because they're starting to hear that, you know, we're looking at this from a very broad perspective.
Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned and Raghu has mentioned is that the members of the Alumni Council that were AHBBS members from the past back this summer presented to senior leadership about, as alumni, things that they are concerned about or want to bring to our attention as a school, and sort of that relationship does not end just after your 1 or 2 years as part of the community. If you're not hired Black as the Dean of Career Services, there are many, many different ways for you to continue to engage with us. And we're always obviously looking for and expecting our alums to share in sort of the trajectory of the school as well. So along those lines, 2 questions, one from Mateo, one from Jonathan. as a new associate dean for D&I, what would you like to see Stern focus on for the next 5 to 10 years? And along the same lines, what would you say are the top 3 challenges in this area that we face today that you hope to help resolve?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I would say is focusing on this intercultural competence and sense of belonging. I think if we increase the intercultural competence, by nature, the sense of belonging will go up. The sense of belonging, I think, exists in in a lot of parts of Stern. So I always would say is that when you walk in the building at Stern, on the MBA side, you're part of a community and you're seen as Stern. And you're seen as Stern not in a way that you have to give up how you identify. Those identities are welcome. So you don't have to change who you are. You're accepted and you're part of this community and you're part of Stern. I think the challenge is that we have to challenge our MBA students to think, oh, because I've had all these great experiences with all these different types of people and they're all Stern and I've accepted them, when I'm in the outside world again, do I look at people that maybe look just like someone in my class and do I treat them the same way? Do I still have that sense of understanding that they may be different, but there's some great things about that because they're going to contribute in ways that I can't contribute. So that's the challenge on the MBA side. And I think it's a challenge with a lot of people, but on the undergrad side, it's really about developing intercultural competence so people start to have engagement experiences, work teams with people that are different than them. And when they do that, that will increase everyone's sense of belonging. So those are the 2 things that we know isn't an overnight thing. We, like with this intercultural competence assessment, most people that take this assessment, and this is a global assessment, fall into the middle category of minimization, which you as a qualified administrator, but that category basically says, I'm someone that focuses on what I have in common with somebody, because that's what's comfortable. And so what it challenges people to do is to say, explore what's different and get to know people that are different and get to know what the differences are about. Because once you have a deeper understanding of those differences, we're all unique in so many different ways. And if we're recognized for what makes us different and unique, you're going to build a stronger relationship with that person. And you're going to be able to work better with that person. So that's a key skill set we're trying to have everyone grow to while they're at Stern. And if they can, that will naturally increase the sense of belonging. I think the challenges are that this is a broad-based approach. And so where, like I mentioned earlier, some schools are focused maybe entirely on an underrepresented population, making sure they have the support they need. And that's certainly part of my role as well, too. I feel that it's so much more powerful if everyone's saying, well, let's look out for the underrepresented population in this area and that area and that area. So in addition to me doing it with whatever resources I have, we have everyone doing it. And everyone buying into this concept of an ally for all. But I don't feel restrained in terms of, you can tell from Raghu that, he trusts me. He's given me a lot of ownership in partnering with everyone. If there's any roadblocks, he's cleared them for me. The main thing that always is a challenge is how you invest in all of this. And I think one thing when you think about this partnership model, my budget isn't that big, but it really doesn't have to be that big because really it's about every area, every program investing. What is our investment, in terms of IDBE? And so that's where my role as a consultant comes in. If you have a choice of investing in this or that, I can help them decide what that is, So even this whole concept of having every student take this intercultural competence assessment, those are being paid by departments. And the other thing that's neat about it is now we're doing different departments. And so, and departments are paying for their staff to go through this intercultural competence as well, too. So I think the bigger challenge is time, because this is not something that's going to snap your fingers and it happens overnight. It's something that we have to, do over a number of years. So 5 years probably is probably the correct horizon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the way that you've approached it is amazing. I mean, having people own their own area, their own sort of like work in this area, not just saying like, this is happening in the silo over here. It is something that everyone owns and is responsible for, has really made the conversation one that we're all invested in. continuously, and it's been incredible under your leadership to see how much of that has happened.
Yeah, and I know that I mean, even admissions, I know you all have decided to read certain things, and you've met as a team and said, what is our role? As, so I kudos to the admissions team to say, how can we learn? How can we grow? And that's what we're seeing with different departments. It's really exciting to see.
So lots of really good questions. Thank you all so much. I'm trying to find ones that that we haven't covered in one way, shape, or form. So we have a question about EMBA, actually, since you mentioned you taught in EMBA. So Isaac is asking, since you've interacted with the Executive MBA program, what advice would you have for someone considering a full-time program versus
Yeah, they're definitely different programs. The executive MBA program tends to be much more lockstep. The range of electives or less. It's kind of depending on what you're trying to do with your MBA. If you are trying to advance in your career, going part-time could be a choice. If you're trying to make a career change, so either changing the industry or the function, the full-time MBA program is probably best for that. The executive MBA program is designed for someone who's trying to get to this next level of leadership. And that's why the class I teach, Leading Inclusive Teams, is for executive MBAs. It's kind of like you're a leader, and now how do you lead a diverse team? Versus the full-time MBA is designed for people that certainly may go in to a post-MBA role managing, but they may not. But even if they are in a managing role, they're not necessarily in a role where they're leading a large team towards some sort of transition. But they all have their own unique things. I'd say the thing that's neat about all the programs is we use the same faculty. So we have the same talented faculty that teach across all programs. But the format delivery of courses, better than me, Rabia, is very different, where executive MBA program is delivered every few weeks. There's a DC program where it's 3 days, once a month. In New York, it's 2 days, Friday, Saturday, twice a month. And so the delivery is different versus with full-time, it's all in, and versus part-time, it's kind of you come in when you come to class, but then you have your outside world work and things like that. The executive MBA is kind of more like that, where you have a job and you're working, and you jump in for an intense period of time, and then you jump back out. And where with the full-time, you're always engaged. As I see Katie join, and she's going to be speaking in a few. She can speak to that probably better than I can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the one other point that I think I like to make for people that ask this question is, for the executive MBA and for the Langone part-time MBA, those are really working professional programs. So the career services available to them are different than for full-time students. For full-time, if you're looking to make a career switch, move either function or industry, the full-time program is built to allow you to make that switch. So you have summer internship, you have on-campus recruiting. It's a very formalized sort of process to do that. For executive MBA and for the Langone part-time MBA, it's definitely, you have consultative resources through the Career Center for Working Professionals, but the on-campus recruiting is just not available in that way to them. So I would say when you're thinking about those, it's really about what your career sort of goals are and the best way to get there. But yeah, happy to answer any specific questions about programs that we offer, program types, what might be the best program for you. Lots of great questions here, you guys. Keep them coming. Some of them Gary has answered, so I'm trying not to be redundant. But we had a question here actually about the comments from the Wells Fargo CEO, which Gary, you actually talked about recently at one of our deans and directors meeting when you were addressing the group. So Diego is asking, with the recent comments from the Wells Fargo CEO, what positive steps has Stern taken to increase representation, whether in faculty administrators or prospective applicant pool and student body?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the reason I raised it, and full disclosure, the CEO is actually a Stern alum. But interestingly enough, Wells Fargo actually reached out to us to have dialogue. So I think that as the follow-up, which I also included in the presentation I was doing recently internally, was that he acknowledged that this was his own unconscious bias. So he recognized, it may have been later after the statement was made public, that it's because of his biases why he's thinking that way. And that's the reason I, introduced it internally, is that it's easy to kind of say, well, there aren't, talented whatever, X, you just fill in the X, whatever it is.
Yep.
And then, and not to say that we're underperforming, because I think that's the thing that people don't want to recognize. And you can't recognize that you're underperforming in an area until you recognize that you're underperforming. And so I think that's my point of saying that, it's easy to find something that's, excuse. But I think that for us, I really believe that this goal towards intercultural competence, one of the benefits of increasing, an organizational intercultural competence is that biases tend to start to go away, because the more you know about something that's different than you, it naturally eliminates some of that bias. And then incidences of things like microaggressions go away. Not that they're going to all go away completely, but they do, in terms of the amount of those happening, because people are more informed. Things like microaggressions and bias happen because people just aren't informed about some aspect of how someone else might identify. And that's what that was a clear expression of. He wasn't as informed, and so he recognized that he needs to do some work in terms of unconscious bias.
Mm-hmm. So Camila has a question today. Camila's asking, hi Gary, thanks for your time today. How do you ensure that all MBA students understand the importance of diversity and inclusion when clubs like AHBBS and classes like the ones you teach are optional? Maybe I think talking about maybe launch and sort of your work at the start of the program.
Yeah, hi Camila, that's a great question. Yeah, we definitely start at day one and launch, so we have dialogue about it. So I think that's one of the things we encourage people, and so we did actually before launch. Before we got folks like Rabia qualified to be administrator, Nico LeBlanc, who is my associate director for diversity and inclusion, and then we actually brought an outside consultant, and we basically did all the one-on-ones with the incoming full-time class over the summer before they started. So we talked to them about intercultural competence. We talked about where they were, how they can grow. We talked about their plan. We also offer them the opportunity to take it again, maybe in their second year, after they kind of worked on a plan in their first year. There's separately a diversity committee that we work with, which is part of student government. And we kind of developed this idea of having all the full-time MBAs do the one-on-ones over the summer, because we didn't have the resources to do it the year before. So they just took the assessment, and we told them, this is your group profile, but you really need to sit down and see how you identify, your specific results. So we ended up doing one-on-ones over the summer, talking to people about doing their plan throughout their first year. And that's when they get exposed to joining clubs and being an ally and things like that. But separately, we've talked to faculty that teach certain courses in the core. Leading in organizations, which is a core course that students can take in their first year, and we talked to them about some of the principles of the IDI. But separately, I'm really proud. One of I think not but the school's biggest accomplishments in this year is that there are some faculty that lead our professional responsibility class, which is required for all graduating students in undergraduate MBA programs, including full Langone and executive MBA. They completely redid the professional responsibility class, which is required. I'm actually teaching it with 40 full-time MBAs later this semester in an intensive format. But they put in a 2-hour module on systemic bias. And they pulled some of the things that I actually used for my Leading Inclusive Teams class. And so now we know that every student will get some exposure to this, above and beyond what we start with at orientation. So the goal is we're starting with it very early on, summer, before they start, and into orientation and launch. And then certainly giving students ownership of it, but then we revisit that as they leave in terms of professional responsibility.
Mm-hmm. I think one thing that we don't talk a lot about, because at Stern there's so much going on, is that we're part of the broader NYU community, and NYU has been doing an incredible amount of programming around this under the leadership of Lisa Coleman. I don't know, Gary, if there's any particular event or series that she's put on that you think that you're particularly have enjoyed.
Well, they're such an amazing resource. In fact, we've talked to Lisa recently about teaching a core course for the executive MBAs, and if we do develop it, it could be something that's worked into the full-time curriculum as well too. But I just recommend people just keep their website kind of as a bookmark, because they're always coming up with some great dialogue, great interviews, great discussion, great content. When everything got very intense with regard to just people wanting to know more about racial injustice and where they should go, it's very comforting to know that I was able to kind of refer them to, the university and the Office of Global Inclusion and Diversity, because they've developed so many good things. They have some courses for administrators to understand some of these aspects even better. So they're a terrific resource. And one of the slides I do show at orientation is, here's all the resources that's NYU, and the first one is, OGI, because they definitely deliver a lot of terrific things.
Yeah, thank you. And as part of this week on Tuesday, we are offering the opportunity for you all to sit in on a conversation that the Office of Diversity and Inclusion is putting on with Opal Tometi, who's the co-founder of hashtag Black Lives Matter.
Mm-hmm.
So feel free to go to the Discover Stern website. You can register for it there, but we are including programming that's happening in real time that's available to the NYU community to you as well. So here's a question that I'd love to. We've had conversations on this before, and as someone who sat on the board of the consortium, I'm sure this is something that you've heard. So Kevin is asking, how do you combat the misconception that applicants from underrepresented groups are held to a lower standard, GMAT, GPA, than that of overrepresented groups when it comes to MBA admissions? Unfortunately, this is something that I have had prior exposure to in my undergraduate experience, and I'm currently experiencing in my MBA journey. Any thoughts on that, Gary?
Yeah, I'm glad that that question was asked. One thing I could tell you is that one thing that I felt that as a student when I was at Stern, I felt that people looked at me and thought I was just here because they needed to diversify my class. I could tell you from my experience talking to students of color that they don't feel that now at Stern. And but I can tell you that I can't guarantee that that's the case at every business school. But at Stern, it goes back to what I was saying before. People, the culture here is amazing. Where you're accepted as you're one of the ones that are here. You're one of the Stern, part of this community, and you should be here. So for me, that's probably my greatest joy coming back as an administrator, to see that that is so different than 30 years ago when I was at Stern, because that is real and it still exists in places. But I can tell you on the MBA level, I do not see that at all, which is great. But, we don't take that for granted. So one of the sessions I do after launch is for all incoming MBAs, just did it last month in September, called Inclusive Leadership. And we talk about not just about intercultural competence, but we have these different scenarios that we go through. And we have people break up into study group. And there's scenarios that happened, because I know the person that created them, at another business school, and they are around race. One's a study group where the study group in this scenario, the quant person is a Black female, and she feels she's not getting credit for her work, and she brings it up with the study group, and they say, well, it's not because you're Black, and you shouldn't bring this up, and so we have people in their study group break out and say, okay, how would you deal with this situation if you had this happen? And then we have a scenario where there's a woman that stumbles in class, and the professor makes some comment about the fact that, we got to 50% women, but it shouldn't be based on things like this. And so it's like, okay, if you're in that classroom, what do you do? So we take students through these real situations where they have to understand that they have a role in that, even if they're not directly affected, because the research shows that if you confront bias when you're not directly affected, it's better for everyone, as opposed to the person that's directly affected. So we talk about that. We define bias, we define microaggressions, just so we're on the same page. We talk about imposter syndrome, just so we're on the same page what this means, and what someone as an individual's role is in terms of helping people in those situations. So even if the culture wasn't the way it is, we have those conversations, and we do it by study group, so that we say, this isn't something to look the other way. This is something you need to take an active role in getting involved in solving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What an incredible case to have to work through, right, with your study group and with a group. And I think what we were talking about earlier with the student clubs and the leadership being people of color, what's incredible about that is their classmates have put them in the help, like elect them to those positions, and have shown the confidence in that. And that's something that as a community we value, and we're so lucky that the students we bring in with their EQ are able to understand and recognize and see so much more than like one factor that makes someone who they are. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think it goes back to, you know, exactly what we were talking about before, is that that's evidence that there's this sense of belonging with the whole population. Certainly, like I said, on the undergrad side, there's some challenges because we're getting in, you know, people that just graduated from high school, but on the MBA side, it is this level of accepting, respecting, you know, confidence. And that's why you'll see, you know, some representation I see joining in. You'll hear from some of these students that are leaders because they're seen as leaders and because they're seen as contributors, and they have a sense of belonging and they know that they're trusted to lead in these environments.
So speaking of EQ, Pierre is asking, thank you so much for your participation. Stern believes strongly in EQ, as do I. Can you speak a little bit more to what EQ means to you?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I really think it's this ability to, you know, connect with people. I like to use the term interpersonal savvy, and because the definition of interpersonal savvy is the ability to interact and build relationships with a diverse group of people. So, you know, a lot of people think, oh, I have interpersonal savvy, you know, I have lots of friends, you know, but are your friends all the same or are they different, you know? So this ability to understand people. And EQ is also about investing in people. You know, that's something we talk about in orientation. You know, we don't want students to just support each other. We want them to invest in each other. And that means you have the conversations you need to have. That means you deal with difficult situations and you don't avoid them. That's how you invest in each other. But you can't invest until you understand what these differences are about. So for me, you can't really be good at EQ unless you're prepared to actually, you know, invest in people. And that's what makes this network so strong. It's not just saying, okay, we're in the same block, let's connect on LinkedIn. It goes far deeper than that. And I think because of the size, everyone kind of has that connection with each other, which is really neat to see.
Yeah. Gary, you've been going strong for a while, but there's still a few more questions. Maybe I'll take one or two more before we move on to the next piece. Julian has a great question here. He said, or Julian says, thank you so much, Rabia and Gary, for this conversation. Can you speak to any new or existing initiatives that Stern is doing to highlight intersectionality amongst underrepresented students, for example, queer students of color?
You know, I'm sorry because I'm going to ask you to repeat the question because I want to make sure I cover it completely, because I was just going to write, I was just going to put my email address in the chat. I do this because sometimes people follow up and sometimes people don't, but I generally answer most of the emails I get, so feel free to email me because I know we're probably going to get to everything. So with that, I also showed that I can't multitask. So could you ask that question so I can respect it and absorb it properly?
No, of course. So Julian is asking, can you speak to any new or existing initiatives that Stern is doing to highlight intersectionality amongst underrepresented students? For example, experiences of queer students of color.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think what I love to see is when we have student leadership in that space as well too. So, you know, we certainly have, you know, great club, you know, outclass, but separately from that, I've talked to student leaders of clubs like SWIB and other clubs about, you know, talking to our LGBTQ plus center about partnering with them to have conversations about intersectionality, to understand that, you know, the sense of belonging goes beyond just, you know, one definition of gender identity, one definition of sexual orientation. And so I think for me, it's important that the clubs, you know, take on this so that they are being representative of their total student population. So the way I look at things is, how do we teach everyone this? Again, I know I sound like a broken record, but this whole concept of intercultural competence, we don't highlight any one particular social identity. You know, we talk about gender identity, we talk about race, we talk about nationality, we talk about ethnicity, we talk about sexual orientation, we talk about religious beliefs, we talk about body size type, ability status, socioeconomic status. And we basically say there's some, and I don't know enough time, but there's a sheet we have with all those social identities, and it goes back to which ones do I think about often, which ones do I not think about often, and where can I grow? You know, where can I grow? And so we want every student to understand that it's a process where you don't just focus on one aspect. And then you also get to this next level of intersectionality. So it's not like you handle all these individually, but those conversations about you know, intersectionality, we definitely love to partner with the clubs to say, how do we make sure we're having those conversations? And that's another thing that I've worked with the diversity committee on at student government, where they basically took all those 10 or so social identities, and then they went to the clubs and say, okay, how are we going to do programming to make sure we're covering these, you know, in combinations and in separate, you know, because that's where a lot of the dialogue happens. You know, I, you know, get to have some interactions with our students, but it's really launch. It's this inclusive leadership session if I happen to teach some students in professional responsibility, but really it's about how do we get the community to, and community leaders to have this dialogue in all these different dimensions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And I think with intersectionality, one thing that it's been so great to see over the last, especially 2 years, is our Stern Women in Business Club. Oftentimes you'd see the leadership of that not include members who also were members of AHBBS. And for the last 2 years, and this year in particular, both of the presidents are also, I think, are women of color. So it's been nice to see the intersectionality happening there, where it's not just one group or club that they're spending all their times with, but they're really like, the intersectionality is so much more welcome, maybe is the right word. I don't know what.
No, I think that's so true. And even more, I think importantly was last year, you know, one of the co-presidents was a white female, one was a black female. And I had conversations with the white female about intersectionality, about gender identity, about all these topics, which was great because it wasn't just put on maybe the person you would think would have that conversation, you know, and they were such a great team that they covered everything, but they, you know, also represented everything in the sense of, I'm going to talk about some areas that maybe I don't directly identify with, because it's important for me to be that voice. And so I think that's the culture that exists here, which, you know, I think is unique. I mean, I can't say whether that does or doesn't exist at other schools, but I find it compelling in terms of it being part of the reason we have the culture we have at Stern.
One thing that we haven't even mentioned about Gary, of the many, many things he does, you've also sat on the board of the Forte Foundation, which promotes women in business. Amongst them, I don't know, all the stuff that keeps you so busy, Gary. So I'm just gonna ask you one final question. I know you guys have a lot of questions. We'll try to answer as many as we can in the chat or follow up with you afterwards because we want to make sure we respond. And if not, we can send them to Gary and he can respond as well. So Gary, my final question to you, having been in the shoes of our prospective students and having worked with students that are at Stern, either like in your time here in your role now or previously, what advice do you have for them thinking about where they are right now and what they're about to embark on? Any sort of like words of wisdom that you can bestow on them?
Yeah, you know, it's such a big decision. You know, it was a big decision for me 30 years ago, and I made it strictly on the program that I felt was going to deliver what I needed, but that I felt that I could be more comfortable with. But I didn't do as the depth that I could have done. And at the end of the day, it was the right decision for me. But at the time, it still wasn't, I didn't think about, well, will I have a community that I'm going to feel like I connect with? Will I feel the sense of belonging across the board? And it's such an intense experience, but such a rewarding experience. You do want to get a sense for, you know, what is that culture and community going to be like? And again, not just in the people that maybe identify with, but with people that are very different than me. I think that's critical. And I think that you want to be in an environment that's going to challenge you, where sometimes you feel like out of 300 whatever students, you're maybe 300 something, but you want to also say, well, there's going to be something where I get to lead. And when you're in that experience, it's going to prepare you for the outside world so much better than if you're in a program that's either safe or a program that isn't going to challenge you in certain ways. But you want it to challenge you in ways that aren't just in the classroom. It's about how you can engage and interact with people that are different, and in an environment that is that way. And that's what I love about New York is, you know, every day walking around New York, you hear a different language, you know, and it's not the same different language, you know. It's such a unique part of the world that you get to absorb in this very unique way. So I think it's about getting a sense for the culture at those environments, because you're going to spend so much time there, these are going to be your lifelong friends. So you want to be able to explore that. You want to not talk yourself out of going for it. That's the biggest thing I would suggest to people. You know, I remember one thing that Easter always used to say, someone in admissions, that, you know, the chances of you getting in if you don't apply is 0. We know that. So I love that line, because you just never know, you know. I didn't know when I applied, you know. I only had 3 years work experience. It was a bit of a gamble, and it was also just a gamble, which I don't necessarily recommend just applying to Stern. But I think that, you know, you won't know unless you do it, you know. So, and tell your true self, tell your story, you know, that you have some great opportunities with the Pick Six to tell you who you are, you know. That's what the committee wants to know. And think about how you can contribute to the school. Don't just think about what you want to get out of the school. Think about how you can make your mark here, because that's what we need. We only have 300 something students, so we need leaders to lead. We need students to say, here's how I'm going to give and not just get. So that's my general advice I typically give folks.
What great advice that is, Gary. Thank you so much for joining us for this great conversation today. Thank you all so much for your questions of Gary. We're so lucky to have you, Gary, on so many levels, and I'm so privileged to have this conversation with you right now. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and it's always great chatting with you, Rabia. You know, we just have great conversations in general. We could just do this any day. I've seen the people that have checked into this session. So as you know, as happy you are with me, I think these prospective students this is an amazing group. I know these students, and so I don't want to delay turning things over to them, because I'm sure they have some great things to share as well too.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Gary. Thanks so much for
Thank you, and good luck, everybody. I put my email in the chat, so feel free to use it. And any questions are open to me, so feel free to use it. And have a great rest of the day, and hopefully we'll see a lot of you here pretty soon in the fall, next year.
Yes. We can't wait to welcome everyone to campus, Gary, when we can have everyone come to New York and come visit us. So
yes, let's get back to the real world.
Bye,
everyone.
Bye. Thanks, Gary. Great. So that was Gary. As you get to know more and more about Stern, you'll hear a lot about Gary. He's someone who's just so beloved in our